here I am in Wardley's Creek. So I've dressed for the weather. I know it looks blue skies and fluffy clouds and everything, but it's actually a little bit nesh around here, as you can see by the fluffiness of my coat, and it's going in the wind. Anyway, this is actually quite
It's only
historic.
last 8 minutes this year though. There are the remains of a Roman quayside at Wardley's Creek. Apparently, unfortunately, they're tucked away behind a private cottage, beyond the boggiest bit of the marsh, so we couldn't really film them. A few years ago, however, we managed to gain access and draw up this scribble, so you'll just have to settle for now. If the quayside was Roman, and we're not committing ourselves either way, then Wardleys would be a good contender for the legendary missing port of Setantiorum. As recorded by the Greek cartographer Claudius Ptolemaeus of Alexandria, or Ptolemy as he was known to his mates, sometime between 127 AD and 148 AD. We're not going to comment on the matter. There's been more blood shed between local historians on this subject than on any other. Whatever the case, the quay's been there a long time. According to Porter's History of the Fylde, as early as 1590 to 1600, William and James Blackburn of Thistleton carried on an extensive trade with Russia, and there can be no doubt that their cargoes were landed on the banks of the Wyre at those ancient harbours. Wardley's Creek even had its own warehouses once, although even in Porter's day they were on their last legs. At Wardleys there are 3 or 4 warehouses in a dilapidated condition, now being used as storehouses for guano. That's bird droppings to you and me. The warehouses are now gone completely. Another building that's disappeared is, or rather was, the Wardleys pub, which once stood guard over the huddle of mass. A ramshackle sea shanty of a hostelry, complete with glass buoys rescued from the river, and an old piano. It burned down in 2011. Arson was suspected. Before then, it was the largest cannabis farm in Lancashire, although that's probably not something to be proud of. The smoking ban did for drinking business, and the Wardleys was forced to close its doors in 2005. 2 years later, it became the Rainbow Palace Chinese restaurant, or rather the bottom half of it became the Rainbow Palace Chinese restaurant. The top half of it became a massive cannabis factory, clocking up enormous electricity bills as the heat lamps turned the entire building into a tropical paradise. The operation went undiscovered until one dark and fateful night, the police helicopter pursuing a speeding car flew over the creek. The pilot apparently was almost blinded when the thermal imaging cameras lit up like Blackpool illuminations. Former Elvis impersonator, and no, we're not making this up, Vincent Fong was arrested and given 5 years. What became of the £1 million worth of cannabis, we couldn't honestly say, but the fish around Wardleys have extremely laid-back expressions these days.
Just up the road,
If you can call it a road.
that's the village of Staynall.
Staynall's one of those buried Lancastrian gems that's remained unmined for centuries.
Because nobody knows where it is.
Or cares.
Its name is old,
It was recorded in 1177 as Staynall,
meaning the standing stone near the hollow.
although historians and etymologists alike haven't got a clue where either of them are now.
Or care.
There's a Roman road buried beneath the fields down Highgate Lane.
We know it's there because we dug it up.
Various other prehistoric and Roman artefacts have been unearthed in the village's gardens.
Staynall is not very big.
You could easily drive through it and not realise it was there.
Or care.
It's more hamlet than village.
Only accessible by the aforementioned lane.
Just wide enough to accommodate 2 fat sheep side by side.
Gathering of small holdings.
So insubstantial that they're forever geographically amalgamated to Staynall,
which isn't exactly a metropolis in its own right.
There's something peculiarly Lancastrian and coastal about the place.
Horsey pinks and hawthorn hedges.
The monks of Cockasand grew their herbs here, back in the mists of history.
It's the sort of charcoal sketched landscape that lends itself to depressed artists.
And Moomin Papa in one of his more pensive moods.
The sort of corner that Derek Jarman might have lived.
If it wasn't so twee.
Having said that, we like Staynall.
Perhaps because of all that.
And the fact that most of it is falling down.
This is what happens when the local council prefers to keep its historical preservation orders in the outside lavatory in case of emergencies.
Heaps of rubbles and cobbles that once were buildings
are now propped up on stilts and baseless optimism. Take Burrows Farm, for example, once Carter's Farm.
Now a damaged exhibit of random-built cobbles.
It has a sheep's skull hanging from one corner, Blair Witch style.
And a written stone incorporated into one wall that's far too time-worn to be legible.
But has a distinct flavour of the Jacobean about it.
Or Rosie Nook.
Alan Clark, the Edwardian author, not the Thatcherite diarist, once said of the building,
"There it lies, in a green hollow.
With a cattle pond on the left,
trees on each side,
and behind it, in the distance over the green hilltop,
the mass of the shipping in the river.
No king's daughter was ever more royally garmented in glory and sweet odour."
Nowadays, this Tudor cottage is only caked in turkey poo.
Its roof and most of the walls collapsed, revealing the timber frame of wattle and daub beneath.
It's a bit depressing, really.
Imagine a cottage that ancient being used as a henhouse for peacocks in America or Australia.
Obviously, it'd be a bit different because it's older than both countries.
Crumbling into history with all the abandoned neglect of Chris Chibnall's Doctor Who.
There'd be a national outcry.
Round these parts, nobody cares.
Sometimes we get a bit complacent of our history.
There's so much of it, it makes people sick.
On which, in fitting note,
click like, subscribe, etc.
if you want.
Just make sure that you're back again next week.
Unless you've also succumbed to progress, of course.
For another Lancashire Footnote.